G'day and welcome to the Inforunners. I'm Execute, joined today by Badges and Algared. How are you guys doing today?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Seeing as it's quite late for me at the minute, so I'm still with you. If I start snoring, just give me a nudge.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We did have a very slow start. I think we took about 2.5 hours to get going today. So yeah, we just had a few background and technical difficulties, and I'm tired, which is always great news to know when I'm coming up to the AOE. But yeah, I'll try and knock myself out with a brick and just get some sleep that way.
And I think we all had a bit of technical difficulties. I know Badgers was having some, I was having some, and I know you were having some. So yeah, hassles all over the place.
Anyway, so we're going to get on with it today. We did a ship standoff as a test kind of episode between the Perseus and the Polaris, which was kind of one of my favorites and obviously Badger's favorite. And today I want to do one that is a bit selfish, right? I am considering. Well, not considering, I'm going to buy a Kraken, right? That's what I want to do. I finally managed to get some funds together and I'm able to buy a Kraken. So I kind of want to know that I'm doing the right thing. So I think I've deserved that after all this time to try to do an episode for myself. So I want you guys to help me know if I'm doing the right thing by buying a Kraken, or should have I brought an Idris instead. So that's why we're doing this one. So I'm being selfish. It's all my fault. You can blame me. Convince me if I'm doing the right thing or the wrong thing, I guess is what I'll put it off to you guys. So where would you guys like to start?
You say you're being selfish, but with IAE coming up, we all know that the Kraken and the Idris are going to be on sale. Yep. They are going to go like hotcakes. Certainly for the credit version and and different variants. The question is, which is best, or which is the best option for people to go for? Mm-hmm. The enabler in me would say, why not both? Yeah. But that's often not an option.
What do you mean the enabler in you? You've clearly already got both. That kind of ruins that whole argument. But anyway. So Badges is probably the more sane one out of all three of us, because you've spent the least Badges. So and you've obviously got the military background. So just on your initial thoughts, what do you think is the better of the two? Just initially.
Yeah, I'm certainly the more sane one out of Algared and myself, because I can count the amount of Idrises I have on only one hand.
I can count the number.
None.
I can count the number of Idrises I've got on one hand too.
Does it take all of your fingers and thumb?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Thought it might. So the Idris and Kraken. I think we're probably, correct me if I'm wrong here, X, talking more about the Kraken stock rather than the privateer. The privateer is a completely different function.
Yeah, but they do come into play in this argument in a way, because they kind of add to the versatility of what you can do. So obviously, you've got an M, P and a K with the Idris, but you've only got the privateer and the Kraken, so to speak. So you do get a bit more versatility, I guess, with the Idris in that respect. But doesn't mean there can't be other ones that they bring down the line as well. But you get where I'm coming from.
But in terms of IAE, unless you're insane and decide I'm going to buy a Protectus pack or an Invictus pack, Legatus pack, you're not going to get an M. The only option you're going to get is the P or the K pack. So
I'm talking purely gameplay terms. So obviously you can be able to earn one in game.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So look, they approach the stock models of both the P for us and the Kraken approach the same thing in very different ways. And it's something we don't talk about much in the game until recently. X, the episode you guys did on the comparison of Stanton versus other systems has started that conversation rolling, which is what happens when you get to big systems or you need to move across multiple systems.
Yep.
Fighters are great when the game is confined to one system. When you need to go 4 systems to do what you need to do, fighters are basically going to leapfrog their way across each of the systems. These ships will make it so that you can travel much greater distances with everything you need to do with your vessels on board it in terms of repair, refuel, kind of different loadouts. You'll be able to carry all of that organically and then go to whichever system you need to go to, hopefully without ever having to refuel for that journey, and then do what it is you need to do. we know that I've got some problems with the Kraken, and my main issue with the Kraken is that the number of beds that it has on board. So we know it's got room for crew. The big question, I think, once they get round to the grey boxes, are they going to put in extra room for the flight crew?
I think
otherwise the ships that, sorry, go on.
I think it actually does have that.
Yeah.
And I wish I had it open in the background to show you, but in the brochure it talks about an area directly beneath the kind of main deck that says habitation, and then there's got another area that says crew quarters. So if it's got crew quarters and it's got habitation, you have to imply that the habitation is for the people that are off the ships. I just, that makes sense to me.
That's 100% right. They have talked about the Kraken will have habitation halves like they have on Alsar, which will do crews for, there'll be room for 1 or 2 crew for each ship. But
so I hope that removes
landed on
your issue there, Badgers.
Yeah, it does a little bit. I mean, obviously, what the Matrix Allies has is room in effect for its own crew at the moment. Although, does that mean that we expect the Idris to go up with the Idris's own flight crew? Because I don't think that's in the Idris's layout. Not that we can trust the Matrix of Lies that much to make these sorts of decisions, but yeah, if you've got more room for your flight crews, not limiting the Kraken, therefore, to only vessels that have their own beds, I think the Kraken's got a lot more utility to it. That would make the Kraken a true carrier, whereas the Idris is a hybrid. So if a carrier is your thing, the Kraken, I think, is going to be more that way.
So to go to the Q&A on the Kraken when it first came out, and the question is, what is meant by towards the rear of a ship, public accommodations can be found for visitors and associates? Does the Kraken offer any special function or gameplay for public services like shops, bars, medical, or trading for those who are waiting for repair or just visiting? And the answer was, there are onboard accommodation rooms to cover 1 to 2 players per landing pad. The basic habs like you find on Grim Hex and provide somewhere to rest, change, and sleep. There are no dedicated facilities like bars or trading areas on board at this time. And you can see that question did end up resulting in let's build a privateer.
Yeah, so as far as I'm aware, it doesn't really labour it the best on this map. But I see those kind of like directly under those little orange boxes there on the map. See the little yellow doors? I believe they're the habs. There is a really good image. I'm trying to do this all in the background because we usually organise everything ahead of time. But then, of course, Badges comes out with this question that just totally throws a loophole in the works. This image here, give me a second. Got to transfer it over so you can see it. But this image here, that to me is that corridor. See how it says Hab 1?
Yes, that would make sense.
Yeah, and so I think if you go back to this plan, I think it's those doors. So like say you got 3 here really close together. Look, 3 here really close together. And then you've got them all separated down that way. So I think that's literally this, like the camera would be here looking down this corridor.
Yeah, that would make a lot more sense, right? Because what you're looking for in a carrier are a number of things. The key about it is to have effectively support persistent flight operations. So you should be able to have aircraft out. You should be having aircraft on board that you're getting ready to go out to replace the ones that are out there when they come back. And you should have ones that you're able to deal with. And that's exactly what the Kraken's got. You've got pads to prepare ready to go next. And you've got the hangars, where you can do, as I understand it, some limited repairs. So yeah, that does change the Kraken in my eyes. That makes it a far more effective at its role than I thought it was going to be, given the numbers on the Matrix of you can only take 10 people.
Yeah.
I tend to, but like you, I tend to think that whereas the Idris seems to have all its crew quarters, the crew required listed, the Kraken doesn't list the crew of the
other ships.
And
I find that very misleading.
But even as you've said, when we were discussing the other week, Badges, 10 really limits what you've got. You've got your captain, you've got your pilot, you've got your gunners, and then you start whittling down. And I think you said you've got one person to do flight crew, for flight management, and it just seems too small. Whereas the Idris seems
You would have in effect on a carrier, so not so much the Kraken, because thankfully the Kraken's all compartmentalized. So you've got your two pads, which for the sake of really imaginatively, that's called pad 1 and pad 2, and then you've got hangars 1 through 4, or however many hangars it's going to have.
Yep.
That's it. So your carrier would in effect have an air traffic controller who's going to control approach and departure from the ship. What you would then have, which is not required on a Kraken, if you've got a proper carrier like the Bengal, where we've seen it's one big deck, things move onto it, things move off of it, you've then got it's in effect an entirely different department which controls movement around, coordinates with the operational side to go, okay, what aircraft do we need next? What loadouts do they need? They're the guys that are going to be moving stuff around, rearming the aircraft, refueling the aircraft, whilst the flight crews are getting their briefings and all that sort of stuff. You don't need any of that in the Kraken. So actually that smaller crew number, it's going to be busy for that one person who's, effectively your, we call it FlyCo, kind of flight coordination. Air traffic controller, but, woe is me, I guess. Cry me a river. It's your job. Go do it.
So for me, the way I've looked at it, the Kraken is a lot more support than the Idris. So for me, that's why I lean into the Kraken more. I also have a thing for asymmetric ships, which just happens to be what Drake kind of do a lot of. I'm not particularly swayed by the actual aesthetics of how Drake looks one way or the other. But to me, it's support. Where I find the Idris itself is a lot more combat focused, and I think I'll just get
agreed.
I think for me, I'd get more use out of a Kraken than I would out of an Idris. But that said, when the kind of shit hits the fan, you kind of hope you've got the Idris. You know what I mean? And I think they'll actually, surprisingly, in a lot of ways, work together really well. So, say you were having a big combat. The Kraken will probably transport a lot of the ships, but when they're moving off, they'll probably filter off into Idris's for protection, and stuff like that.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, I agreed.
I was going to say, well, and I agree with that, because one of the things people asked in the first Q&A is, do the Kraken shields cover the ships parked on the deck? And the answer was basically, no, they don't. So that makes it slightly different from, I think, other ships like the even the 890, where the ships rise up and you can take off from inside, or they can raise it up. But the shields in the Kraken, and I imagine this will probably be similar to any ship with a deck when
Oh, I think we lost him.
Oh, we've lost him.
Yeah, he's had a stroke. No, he'll be back.
Yeah.
I think he's right.
I'm just trying to cover the bit that they cover the hull, but they don't cover the ships or the crew working on the deck. So
it really hits you when he comes back, doesn't it? Just like a truck. You just came in with a flurry of words again, mate. It's all good. It's all good. You're back. But yeah, we got what you were saying. You were talking about them being uncovered and covered, and I agree. Yeah. There are advantages to both, and I think at the end of the day, you're gaining numbers with the Kraken, but you're gaining the covered. It's in a weird way. I think you'd both agree. It's kind of like the whole series versus the Banu Merchantman. In a like how the cargo works there. So it's the same thing, just in a ship term instead of a cargo term. But again, I also think it also helps define their roles where. Yes, you can take the Kraken into combat, but realistically, I don't like all those shots we saw of the Kraken fighting stuff. That's fighting small fleets. Did you notice that most of the photos were not really it fighting other capitals? There is one of it fighting the Idris or whatever, but I think that's I don't know. You tell me, Badges, but I think that's like worst case scenario. The Kraken is not really a ship you want to be directly in combat. It kind of gets you to there, and then you go off and do your thing.
Yeah, and I mean, carriers obviously in the real world are going to work slightly differently. But part of that is because you need to be steady to launch and recover aircraft. And when you think about it from the Idris's perspective, from the Bengal's perspective, you can't be maneuvering hard when you're, you're in the final approach. All of a sudden, the back end shifts and you become a permanent feature of one of their thrusters, because the ship suddenly moved. So it massively hampers your maneuverability. But the Kraken isn't designed for that, as you rightly point out. The Kraken, yes, you could go into situations where it knows it's going to win. That's where you pick your engagements, like anything. Whereas the Idris itself is a combat vessel where it can keep the fighters inside, seal them away completely, and then go and fight directly by itself.
So for me, something one thing do you want to talk about what he's talking about? Because about to change the subject. So,
I was going to
go ahead.
say that because with the Kraken, because it's on pads, those sharp movements are still going to give you that same problem of I'm landing my ship, I'm coming in, the ship suddenly tilts really violently, and I become a mess on the landing pad, which has wiped it out for everyone else.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's a little bit like the Merlin and the Connie situation again.
Yeah. So it does have those issues. The advantage of that the Kraken does have, apart from those deck pads, is it does have two hangars.
Yes.
It can take fighters. So it can take, I think it's 2 ships, which basically is 2/3 of what the Idris can carry inside.
Yes.
I actually think the ships on the inside you'll have better ability in those ships to be able to do repair. You see there's a picture in the Kraken for a crane basically repairing a Buccaneer's wing.
I'll grab that for you.
Now I expect that will give you, the Idris will have similar repair capability. Now the Kraken can repair stuff that's on the deck, but I think that will be using hand repair rather than heavy repair. And both ships, like people said in the Q&A for the Kraken, what are the Kraken's refuel, restock and repair abilities for dock ships? And the ability is, yes, it's a mobile base. It's going to refuel, restock and repair ships that are there. But they're going to have to take, both suppliers are going to have to take from the stores, and that's going to be exactly the same for the Bengal, Javelin, the Idris, the Liberator, the 890 Jump, you name it. Any ship that's, even the Connie with its P-52 is going to have that same type of reload from the stores. So,
and it's interesting what you're saying about the parts there, Algared, because what is a strength in one way is a weakness in the other. Sure, your fighters are exposed on the Kraken, but in the same way, if you're caught short, a fleet gets the jump on you, X in his Kraken can get his fighters away without ever exposing the interior of his ship to threat. So he doesn't need to open bow doors and risk taking ordnance through it to get all his fighters away. They're already gone.
The other part about that is also deploying them, because in the Idris they're all in a tunnel, so you got to get one out, then the next one. So if they literally destroy the first one, you're going to have trouble getting over it to get out. So that's another thing. So really, you want them out before the fight starts, don't you?
Yeah.
But I'm also reminded of Midway. What happened to the Japanese carriers when they were changing their ordnance halfway through and they had all their ships on the deck? Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, I mean, yes. The issue there was really poor.
Poor management.
I mean, we've kind of learnt those lessons across all navies now. I think we quite looked at that and went, let's not let our ships do that. That'll be rubbish.
Yeah. But if you've got a ship on the deck and it blows up, that ship blowing up is going to do significant damage to the Kraken anyway. So if someone got a drop on you and you've got ships on the deck, you're going to be in a bad way. So similar type of problems, but those other ships on other pads will, as you were saying, be able to get off. So hopefully,
it really does come down to that scenario basis there, and that's a hard one to call. And I think what we're both saying, or all of us are saying, is there's weaknesses to both approaches, and I don't think one is better than the other. Quite honestly, I think I think the only real strength is that you get a lot more ships on the Kraken than you get on the Idris, personally, because as I said, once you weigh the two left and right, I prefer more ships than less.
Here's a thought. You know the way Drake always overgunned. So they're overgunned but less armor. And what we've got with the deck, we've got overgunned because you've got more ships, but because the shields don't cover the ships
It's under
or
armored.
cover the deck, it's under armored. Whereas the Idris has less ships, but they're internally stored with the heavier armor because it's a military ship.
Yep.
So it's got the better armor, and so again, it kind of fits in with that Drake philosophy, doesn't it? It's the overgunned, underarmored.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, what I was going to change the topic to before, one of the big weaknesses for me, and you guys can both come at this for me, but one of the ones I've always struggled with the Idris specifically, is how the main function. So I'm talking specifically about the rail gun or whatever the gun is that's where the rail gun goes, depending on the variant, is fixed. That's always pissed me off to a T. You're talking about a thing that is like the Titanic trying to turn in space. So it rules it out ever being used on fighters. I don't think you can even use it on, say, something like a Connie, right? I think you would struggle to even use it on something like a Polaris, right? So I think it really puts it in, it makes that gun, which is its main feature, I think, would you guys say that's, well, I don't know, you could say that or the Hangar, but its main featured gun is only good in ships in its own kind of size class, and up, you know. So I find that rather limiting. I would have liked to have seen maybe, and I don't know how to put this, but like some smaller guns or a variant where you can attach it and maybe it becomes 2 turrets or something, and then, you know, but they're smaller. So a variant of the Idris where it shoots down rather than shoots up, if that makes sense. But you guys tell me your thoughts, Badger. Specifically, I really want to hear from you because of the military stuff. But does that limit where this ship goes because of that fixed gun? Because to me, it's always seemed like a massive weakness to me.
So one of the things in the description of it is that it is frigates are more maneuverable and highly configurable. So they're obviously trying to draw a very sharp distinction there between capital ships and the frigate that is the Idris. Yeah, I think it's actually a really nice balance mechanic. So if something's coming towards you as a gunner, it's really easy to hit, because there's very little bearing change. You're not having to lead your target, and in space, you're not even having to add for like round drop off. Right? Obviously, the further a round goes, it starts to lose altitude.
Yep.
In space, because what gravity is doing that to it? Yeah. So you know you can literally, and we've all seen it, right? Something coming straight at you is so much easier to hit than something that's zipping past you at 90 degrees. I think it's a nice balance mechanic because it does mean, you know, you're not just going to go one-shotting fighters with this thing. I also think, having played Hell Let Loose a couple of times and having screamed like a 5-year-old girl when I realised in my tank as a tank commander, as I zoom into the enemy armour contact, that it is in fact a Tiger and I'm staring down its barrel, that there are going to be some horrific moments for people where they realise that what they're looking at is an Idris that's pointed at them.
I think,
and there's just going to be this moment of, followed by a blinding flash and then nothingness.
Well, they might be lucky. They might be the one person who survives, who gets out of the burning wreck. But yeah, that is a concern. But with the Idris P, we actually don't have the size 10 gun.
No,
it's listed as being available.
Like this. Hang on, like this Hornet. You can't quite see it, but there's a little Hornet there, and it's like, oops.
Although that one looks like he's actually going to become a, you know, I think we just hit some debris as he plows into the armored doors of the pad there. But the Idris P doesn't have the size 10 gun. It has it. It has it available, and you could get that with the K pack, which came out with, made available when the Kraken was made, that came out. And that makes it that K-Pack really does change the Idris. It also changes the Idris in terms of giving it, changing some of its turrets to, I think it's either remote.
Remote. Yeah, it makes them remote.
Again.
Yeah.
But yes, you're entirely correct in that the most scary thing on it needs to be pointed at you to have that effect. Oh, welcome back, Idris. You're back with us now.
I saw myself come back then.
Sorry, mate. You were saying.
Yeah, I was just saying that the fact that the gun's not there does change that when you're comparing the Idris P versus the Kraken. It does make the weapon balance is significantly in the Kraken's favour. So the Kraken's got a size 8 turret on the front. It's got size 6s and size 5s. The Idris, when you don't have the size 10, it's got size 5s and size 4s. And so you've got this disparity in gun sizes, which again goes to that Kraken Drake overgunned, but under armoured, whereas the Idris is over armoured or more armoured, but I suppose you could say undergunned. And the K-Pack was really an endeavour to address what I think CIG saw as a significant disparity in those two ships.
Yeah,
so you give it a size 10 plus change some of those turrets to remote.
So for me, the Kraken, like on the Idris, the guns are kind of fixed. With the Kraken, the ships are a part of the guns are a part of the ships that are on its deck and stuff like that. And I think while that is weaker initially because you've got to get people to the ships, it's also a strength because it gives it more multi-role. So you can swap out those ships for prospectors or vultures or whatever, role you're doing. So it gives it that combat and utility role where the only way you can kind of do that on the Idris is with the 3 ships that fit in its belly. So that when you've got essentially 8 ships that you can put on a Kraken versus 3 in an Idris, there's just no contest there. Like it one has got so much more versatility than the other. But I think having fixed guns and people getting into a turret is a lot easier than getting into a ship, especially if you've got to walk out onto the deck and potentially be under fire. So there's no contest there. In a combat situation, the Idris just totally takes the show, right? But for me, combat's not everything in this game. Like I've always treated combat like it's going to be a weekend raid event, or in other MMOs like WoW or something like that. And that's traditionally how it used to work because we live in a society where most people work Monday to Friday. They come home on the weekend, and that's when most people are playing because that's where most people are at home. And so during the week, you get those people that are not as fortunate or whatever reason. I'm not going to chuck people under the bus, but they're at home, and so they do a lot of the saving up, the organising, and getting prepped for the weekend events, and so it's a tit for tat. People help each other out, and for me, I can see, because I'm one of those people that would be home, right? I don't work, so I basically would be at home. I'd get more use out of the Kraken than the Idris, where someone that works more often would get more use out of the Idris.
Yeah, and I think, look, you're right. This is where we come down to the real difference in roles of the ships. The Kraken, now that I know that about the accommodation, I'm more than happy to classify the Kraken as a carrier. That's exactly what it is. It's its role. Before that, if you're only talking about 10 med to the whole thing, I would have argued that it's not. It's more a mobile station than anything else. But now we know that. Now, the Idris, on the other hand, absolutely isn't any of those things. It's not a carrier because, the Kraken, all right, you lose a couple of fighters, but you've potentially got stuff stored in the hangars. So you bring those out, you've got room to repair them. In effect, if you... let's say the Idris, you're trying to land a damaged Gladius. The Gladius hits the deck, the gear gives way, it skids across the deck. It's there damaged, it bursts into flame, whatever it is. You've now just blacked the entire deck. That entire space is basically unusable to you now until you clear it. And it can, it's going to put the 2 fighters in a way. Maybe it's got an MPUV in there, maybe it hasn't. Maybe it's got something else in the hangar. But whatever it is, it's not keeping up sustained ops. The Idris is much more something that you would send and you go, we don't know what's going on, but it's likely hostile. And you send it there to figure that out. You don't commit the Idris straight away. You stop off at the edge of the system, put your 2 fighters up, off they go. They then try and, scout out, clear the way ahead of the Idris. The Idris has then got potentially enough people. It's got armory, it's got brig, it's got all those toys that allow it to maybe capture people to find out what's going on, to deal with, maybe putting a small landing party into a station or down to a facility, whatever it is. It's got options, but it's not what you're talking about. And it is, in effect, that is it with the Idris. It might also join in fleet. Well, it will join in fleet combat, right, and make use of its railgun if it's got the right pack for it. Your Kraken can have the privateer pack, and I think it's worth mentioning the utility that brings as well.
Yeah. So that is a good point, because those 3 packs for the Idris, so to speak, and I know I've called them packs and they're not really that, but they're all combat focused.
Yes.
That's a big thing. Like, where I don't know how drastic you guys think it is, but I think the privateer more drastically changes the Kraken than any of those packs do for the Idris.
Massively.
I know people bag out the privateer, but I actually think the privateer is the better version, because it gives you that versatility. It gives you that the shops that your crew that are landed on can go shop, buy supplies in. You can have a bar, you can have the clothing shops, you can have your food shops, you can have those shops. So you can generate passive income, I suppose, by those shops. Yes, those shops do take away from your cargo. Absolutely, they do take away from the cargo and supplies you can use for the rest of it. For rearming and refueling and the rest of and that. But it's still a significant advantage, and it does turn the Kraken into a mobile.
Yeah. This is a question I'm going to put out to the community as well, because this is something that I have talked about with Algared. I'm not sure if I've talked about with you, Badges, but there is no hard data.
Now, if I've got a standard P,
there's no hard data I can find on the physical sizes of the hangars inside the Idris. And one of the things I was curious about is, if you look here, so this is how big the hangar is, right? And you got cargo lifts here. What I'm wondering is, they've never really talked about the exact size, not that what I can find, and I'm wondering, right? You look here, these medium pads. When I work out the rough size, so it seems to be roughly in about here, I think you can fit 3 medium pads in there, right? So my whole question is this 3 mediums that fit in here, or is it 3 smalls? And as far as I'm aware, it's like a small, because the biggest ship that I'm aware of, width-wise, is like the Eclipse, right? And that will fit on a small pad. But I've also heard other ships that are bigger than that. So I'm just questioning. Would like to hear from the community and in the comments. Have you seen anything that talks to the exact, like, what are the metrics of those size of pads? Are they mediums or are they smalls? Because if they're smalls, Kraken wins. If it's medium and you get 3 medium pads that are in cover where this only gets 2, that starts to pull things back. Not saying it makes the Kraken worse than the Idris or whatever, but it starts to make it a bit more balanced in my perspective. So yeah.
I know that in the early development that the Idris was supposed to carry at least 2 Hornet fighters, and one of the reasons it grew was because they were using the old metric.
Yeah.
But I have also heard that at least at some point in Squadron, the Idris is supposed to land a Retaliator. Now, I have no idea whether that's true, whether it's just someone peeing into the wind, but it's one of the things I've heard. So that if it can land a Retaliator, that would say medium pad, which kind of fits with.
Actually, Retaliators are large, but I get your point.
Okay.
Yep.
But if you could land, and it would take up probably all the space. But I think, from what I've heard, it is clearly 2 to 3 Hornets that it can take, or ships that size.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're kind of, I think the issue for me with the Idris was pad size would be the width. So if you've got much longer, thinner ships, they're more likely to end up somewhere in the middle of that thing. And I think it almost, it comes a size from pad, because you're not talking about a box, we're talking about a long, thin stretch. Cue people, I guess, trying to get the longest, thinnest ship they can and just post it through the middle, like open up a Holly, just post it in. Put, I don't know.
Well, surprising thing about that Retaliator Algared brings up is it is from the front. Both the Saber and the Retaliator are a very similar silhouette. As in, it's actually quite small. So from that point of view, that's why the Retaliator probably can fit in, because it is long and thin. But then as soon as you go to the top, the thing becomes like really wide and really, So it's one of the things to do with the stealth of the torpedo stuff, is because if it's looking on at you, it's got a really small profile, which gives it a little bit of stealth ability and stuff like that. But yeah, I get your point 100%. Yeah, okay, so you guys have kind of like reconfirmed my whole thoughts on this. Like, I'm still more in favor of the Kraken because I'm not the most combat focused person, so that's for me. But I think for people in our audience that are watching, I think those that are combat focused among us, it kind of helps them lean more towards the Idris, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, go on, Algared.
I was going to say, if you're going Idris up against the Kraken, and Idris P up against the Kraken in a gunfight, just those two ships, and they don't have any ships on the deck, the Kraken actually has more firepower to bear than an Idris.
Interesting.
Than the Idris P. So the Kraken currently has 2 size 8 man turrets. It currently has 4 size 6 man turrets in 2 gun configurations, and it has 4 size 5 turrets with 2 guns per turret in remote turrets. The Kraken the Idris P, on the other hand, only has 4 size 4s, Gatlings in 2 guns per turret, and 6 size 5s, Galarin laser repeaters in 2 guns per turret. So
that's interesting.
8 turrets versus 9, but heavier turrets in the Kraken. And so if they're going head to head by themselves, you're going to rely on the armor of Idris versus the firepower of the Kraken, and I think they're fairly balanced. And that's why I think the K-Pack came out.
Yeah,
they wanted to give that by itself that extra gun to be able to overpower the bigger ship if needed.
The interesting thing there, of course, is that the Idris and the Matrix of Lies, admittedly, has size 10 available. So while it might not be able to buy another railgun, it might be able to buy something considerably powerful to put into that spot. What I also noticed that's interesting is when you put the pack in, it seems to reduce your internal cargo space, I assume through power packs and everything else it needs to fire the railgun. So that's really interesting in that, does that mean that frees up module space?
Yep.
Because wouldn't that make sense with a K-Pack? If you could if they were just another module room that you just go and pop it into the bottom, there you go, railguns fitted. You remove those. Maybe that's part of is it the 6 module rooms that they said, or is it 2 for the Idris? I can't remember which one it was, but
remember the number off of Idris. But when you're right, it should reduce the cargo space. When Idris M and Idris P came out, the Idris M originally had an extra power pack or power source to supply the railgun, and the Idris P was said to have more cargo space because they'd taken out the railgun and the power unit, which was used to power that, and so that was giving you your extra cargo space. They also said it was faster than the M because they'd reduced the armor, so it had reduced armor than the M, and it had the railgun removed and a power plant removed, which meant it was lighter, which gave it more cargo space. So they had those factors versus the M.
I think
not saying it's unarmored, just lighter armored than the M.
Yeah. So I think there's one other thing that we haven't really talked about too that's really obvious that I can't believe we haven't brought up until now because I only just thought of it, that the Idris is in Squadron 42. It's the main ship of the entire game. I think we'd have to say, arguably, that the Idris is going to be a lot more polished than the Kraken because it's just had more time spent on it because of it being in Squadron 42. Unless, Episode 3, for some reason, they start using a Kraken because the Idris has been blown up and, they put all that... Cuts. Yeah, budget cuts or whatever. You know what I mean? Or they've just got to use a ship because they've, we'll just all move on to this Drake one because the Idris is gone, I don't know if that's what's going to happen. I'm just saying that's the only other way that you could get the Kraken used a lot more. But my thought would be it just seems that it's going to be a lot more polished and, a lot more eyes have gone over it. and I think it'll be probably a lot more refined.
Mhm.
Not to say that they slack on the other ships by any means, but just because it's been used more and every part of it had said so many more eyes over it, it's just going to be, as I said, more refined and a lot more fixed. And I think you guys will agree with me on that, yeah?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Right.
Although if I had a P and I could get an M, I certainly would upgrade to the M because it actually increase. Not only does it have a railgun,
You'll be able to do
but
that.
it also picks up.
You'll be able to do that in game though. Like I've
Yeah,
always argued that with people.
I'm not saying buy it. I'm not saying buy it. I'm saying upgrade it in game, because the upgrade in game, not only do you get your extra armor, assuming that is still a thing, but you do pick up the railgun, and you pick up a size 7 turret as well, ship-to-ship turret, as well as the torpedoes.
And we do get people
So you
coming.
you get missiles and that as well. So yeah.
Though, from the Fix My Fleets, though, Algared too, we get people coming to us going, oh, should I melt this entire bunch of ships and buy like artist pack just so I can get an M? And we're like, hell no. So for me, it's just an earning game, no matter what it comes with. Yep. Every ship, I will almost adamantly say get the base variant and earn all the other stuff in game, because it's just, you're overpaying for modules no matter what they are. I treat almost every single one of them like fighters. Even the privateer, though, like, let's just take that as an example. It's $350 extra. I would argue that says that there's a lot of rep grind in there for that price, right? But still, I don't think it's worth $350, right? I still would look at that and go, all right, so if that's an exceptional amount of grind to get to it, I still think I just can't see $350 value in a module. I just can't. Like, you're essentially, let's put it on the on the paper. That's an Endeavor at the moment, or a Crucible. It was the old Reclaimer. So an entire ship for that price, and we're talking about some pretty meaty ships there, right? For a module. I just can't.
Do you want the module, or do you want the Idris or the Endeavor or the Crucible? And from us, that's
yeah. Look, and even if you look at one that's out, like the Starfarer, right? And the Starfarer is a little less than that, but like, I still look at it like that, and I just can't see how you can get as much functionality as an entire ship out of any module. Like, yes, it's multiple shops and stuff like that, but I just don't see it. So badges. From you, what would you like to hear from people in the comments? What are some things that you would like to hear?
That is a very good question. I think, just where do people think? Do people think this was a fair comparison? Because one is a carrier and one is not, but they're both kind of, I understand they're priced vaguely in the same ballpark.
Yeah, they're both capitals, essentially, like the bigger capitals.
Yeah. So what do people think, and which one do you see yourself being part of a crew on, and everything else? Because I think, it's a really interesting comparison. Actually, this has captured my imagination almost as much as the Polaris Perseus one.
Yeah.
Because we're looking at two very different ways of effectively delivering fighters as a capability. It's really interesting. But what do people find themselves siding towards, and do you think this was a fair comparison?
It does ironically come back to what Algared said at the start. Why not both? Because they both they do. Like, you know what I mean? Like, as I said, like, I can see the Krakens delivering the ships and then sitting at the back of the combat and being there as a support craft. But I can also see them filtering off those ships into Idris's, so they can go further through enemy territory and deliver the knockout punch, where you just the Idrises themselves just can't take as many ships with them, and that's their weakness. So there are strengths to both, and I think, let's be honest, I think we'll both agree there is definitely enough room in the game for both.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I was just looking at the Matrix of Lies and the systems, and it just caught me. Both of them have 2 capital shield generators, but the Idris has also 12 medium shield generators. That's like another 4. That's a massive amount of shielding on an Idris P. That blows my mind. Now, whether that stays, that's
Well, it also gives a lot of
But
redundancy too, doesn't it? Because
Yeah.
if they're all
Yeah.
spread out across the ship, it's a lot harder to take out and stuff like that. So yeah, I
So-
think a lot of this stuff, like, because let's be honest, like just like the Perseus and the Polaris, they weren't in game. It's the same thing with these. I try to deliberately pick things that I think are on the as level as possible because it makes the discussion more fair. But maybe the next one we'll do on this is two ships that are already in game. So we can have a look at a bit of that, but that maybe that's what I want to hear in suggestions as well. Is suggestions in the comments. So give us a couple of your versus suggestions. If they're ludicrous, people will tell you they're ludicrous, right? So if you're trying to compare an Aurora to a Javelin, we're going to roast you, right? So try to be as fair as possible, right? So for example, one that you might do might be, what is the best Vanguard variant? That might be something. But we're trying to get two that are similar yet different enough that you're trying to find. There is no better, by the way. It's the same thing with the Perseus and the Polaris. That is your conclusion. It's not really that what is better. That's not what we're looking at. It's what they're best for each, right? And that's like Badgers will tell you. We sat down one day with a whole bunch of the military guys, and we were like, "What is the best dropship?" You know what the conclusion was? They're all the best at what they're best at. There is no best dropship in the game. There's room, ironically, for every single one, and there's like 6 or 7 of them, right?
You got to pick your tool for the job.
That's it. That's 100% it. Yeah. So, Algared, what would you like to hear in the comments below?
I'd like to hear, what do you think? Idris versus a Kraken in a head-up fight. What do you think is best? I'm leaning a bit more to the Idris now, just because of that shield situation that I just realised. Whereas before I was thinking Kraken just would overpower the Idris with its just ships, and I'm not talking the ships. I'm not talking the other stuff that it brings, like the ships on the deck or the ships in the hangar. I'm just talking those two ships. Are they evenly matched? Are they very similar? I vaguely remember that the Idris was supposedly kind of taking in. The Kraken was kind of taking Idris hull and then stripping it back and then kind of rebuilding it as kind of a carrier, but and the sizes kind of indicate, at least CIG talked about as a ballpark as what they were doing, but whether it's the lore aspect or not, I'm not sure. But yeah. So what do you think? How close are they to each other, or are they just totally outclassed?
I think the last thing I'll ask too is really think about this, because I've struggled with this myself, and I know I've talked about this with Algared and Badgers as well, is what other capital ships would you add in that area? And most people will say, oh, like a full-on combat ship with no hangar, right? But I think that, yeah, okay, that's one. But where else can you go? Can you lean more into the support? Can we have like a really big metal? Like it just goes on and on. And I wonder how far outside the capital landscape do you go? Are they all just hyper generalized? So I pose that question to you guys. Excuse me. All right. Is there anything else you gents want to add before we wrap up?
No, just that the answer to your question, X, in the chat is absolutely not the Liberator.
Oh, okay,
so
cool.
stop mentioning the Liberator.
Yeah, the Liberator is a transport ship. It is not a carrier.
CIG classifies like carrier. That's what I'm going to say. All right.
Yeah, we think they're wrong. There you go.
Yeah. All right. So don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and make sure it's set to all notifications so you get all of our videos. Also, don't forget to follow us on Patreon if you want to go the extra mile. It helps us out with gear. We're looking to save up for a camera for Badgers this time around, because I don't know if you can tell, he's actually on a different camera to me and Algared, and he's doing some NVIDIA broadcast trickery to get his green screen to work. The ugliness we can't fix, but we can probably fix the picture, so we'll work. Yeah.
Now, X, I know that CIG count the Liberator as a light carrier, but they also class the Kraken as a light carrier.
They do indeed, which is really weird. So there's something amiss there for sure. 100%.
Yeah.
I would argue if you're going to call the Liberator light carrier, that this is either a medium or a heavy, with the Pegasus being the one. Well, the Pegasus doesn't exist anymore, didn't they? They retroactively took it out.
It's back in.
It's back in. Oh god, they're changing their mind like their underpants again. But you get what I'm trying to say. They need to, if they're going to do it, pick your thing. But we've talked about this before. I actually think they're going to just chuck it all out at the end and then redo them just before release, so they're all categorized properly. Well, fingers crossed. But yeah. All right. With that, then he's been Badgers. He's been Algared. I've been Execute.
He's been Execute.
Catch you in the next one.
And we're out of here.